Hi, welcome to Physionic, where we learn the body from the macro to the micro. If that's something you think you'd be interested in, then consider subscribing. In this piece of content, we're going to be discussing a bit of data on how sleep impacts, or the amount of sleep impacts, our susceptibility to getting sick.
Learn Your Body, a science-based education.
Now, this particular data comes from a paper that I fully dissected, and I will have that paper linked to this content, as well as my notes, as well as any amendments that might follow this content. But briefly, let's jump into a little bit of the experimental design, the study design. How did they go about studying this particular subject so that we can get some framework before we get into the data? There were a total of 164 participants in this study, a nice mixture of men and women. The age range was between 18 and I believe 55 years old, and the average age was about 30. So all of these individuals were relatively young. At least you didn't have any extremely old, and certainly nobody that was extremely young either. The participants of the study were screened for particular antibodies that would be extremely effective against the virus that they would be given. Yes, you heard me correctly. These individuals are going to be injected with a virus to get them sick specifically. It's a pretty crazy study. And the participants that had high levels of antibodies for this particular virus that would be able to fight off this infection more effectively, they were excluded from the study because they didn't want that to be a confounding variable coming from genetics. So once those individuals were excluded, then they had a nice population, or a nice sample I should say, of individuals that were kind of on the same page, except for the only big difference was the amount of sleep that they were receiving. The participants had their sleep duration measured for 7 days leading up to the study, and then the individuals were all quarantined for 6 days. And on the first day, they were inoculated, they were given the virus at the same dose, and then they were monitored for those 5 days. Now, during that monitoring process, the researchers collected all of the sputum, meaning that they took up every single nose blow, they took up every single drop of anything that came out of their mouth, out of their nose. Really, it's pretty disgusting to think about it, but they had to collect all this information and to get data from it, so that's how they went about it. They also took blood measurements to make sure, kind of pre-study and after the study, how things ended up changing. So ultimately what ended up happening is, out of the 164 that were included in this study, only about 120, slightly above 120, actually ended up getting infected. So just because you're giving people the virus doesn't mean that the virus is actually going to catch. I mean, the immune system might get rid of it quickly enough, it might not get to where it needs to go, it might just die off. There are a number of different reasons. So there's only a real population, a real sample I should say again, that it's slightly above 120 individuals that were actually confirmed as infected. And as another note, which may or may not be a confounding variable, only 48 of those individuals actually experienced physical symptoms. So while you did see increases in particular antibodies and things of that nature, only 48 actually had the sniffles and actually felt really terrible, and you could actually tell that they were sick. But it does seem that the individuals that did get sick, the individuals that got the least amount of sleep, based off of the graph, based off of the data that you're seeing now, that they had the highest risk of getting sick. So, and it's a pretty linear relationship there. If you get more sleep, at least up to about 8 hours of sleep, and they didn't measure anything beyond that, but I imagine that it's not going to continue to decrease to nothing, obviously, because sleep isn't a miracle cure, but it certainly has a profound impact, at least based off of this particular data. So the less sleep that you get, the more susceptible you are, which is an inverse relationship, and the more sleep that you get, the less susceptible you are to getting sick, at least from this rhinovirus, this cold virus. So ultimately, what does this study tell us? Well, it tells us two main things. One is that just because you're directly exposed to a virus and the exact same amount of virus as everybody else in your group, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will actually get sick. So again, being exposed, directly exposed to a virus doesn't mean that you're going to get sick. However, to decrease your chance of getting sick, you want to maximize your sleep, at least up to 7-8 hours of sleep. Now, the authors did mention, the researchers did mention that there may be a detrimental impact from consuming too much sleep, so 9 hours and above, but they did not have actual data for this, so that was not covered in this study, but I wanted to mention it just in case. So there you have it. Getting adequate sleep is a great buffer against getting sick. So with all of that said, that's what I've got for you. Hopefully it was informative, and I hope I have the pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one, guys. Bye.